We are now going to another panel with another impressive woman of the video games industry. What I really love is how diverse and how mixed this audience is. This is fantastic. So I'd like to welcome to the stage for the panel to close Game Dev Stories. I'd like Julie Beaugrand. I've probably spent that wrong. Round of applause, please.
Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be here. You have probably attended a bunch of amazing talks today and heard a lot about people. Nicolas Cage, amazing. Now we're actually going to learn about what not to do. And today we're going to talk about learning from mistakes, the big no's in game development. So we have with us an expert array of panelists here, very seasoned leaders. So Vincent from Carcajou Games. Hello, Vincent. Hello. Lee from Alien Trap Games.
Hello.
And Sean from Extra Dimension Games. Got that.
Correct.
So before we get into it, I actually have a question for everyone in the room. Who here can think back to a time where there was this giant blunder, mistake, and that actually helped you improve your team or your organization? Can I get a show of hands? Okay, not bad. Okay, cool. So we're in a group here of fellow failure havers and mistake makers. So great, this is a safe space. So we can get right into it and show exactly really the cool thing about this is that this allows us to learn and grow and ultimately brings us to our successes. So I'm gonna start with a big question for each of you, which is, can you think back to a huge challenge, a big mistake that you've made, and ultimately what you learned from it?
Yeah, I could talk. It's funny, I agreed to do a panel and they put me on the mistake panel. I don't know. So, I don't know. I don't think we've ever had a bad launch. I was thinking about that because you sent me the questions before. But I think when I thought about our biggest mistakes that we made, that I try to just tell people about it, just the experiences we had with publishers in the past. And really, I try to just give a lot of advice on that. Just find the right partners is the biggest thing. And I mean, that applies to a lot of things. I think the biggest horror stories you hear from other studios is bad co-founder, sometimes bad hires for a very small team, but usually it's bad publisher. So I can get into a lot of details of that. They're gone. They weren't bankrupt. So I'm happy to talk bad about them.
Thanks, Lee. Sean?
Yeah, there's certainly lots of failures that you accumulate in your years in game development. I've got a number in terms of failed product launches, failed successful product launches, which is a unique combination. So when we launched The Simpsons Tapped Out way back in 2012, it was load tested, and we did all sorts of launch prep to get it to a certain threshold. But when it actually went live, it was order of magnitude more popular than expected, and that caused an order of magnitude more bugs to show up, and we had to pull it down from the App Store, which we had recently been acquired by EA, and that was not a great way to start that relationship. But there was tremendous consumer sentiment around it. People really loved to play it, even though it was really broken. It was still making money, and we were afforded the chance to sort of rebuild it from there. And it was ultimately the best education for EA as a whole as to what success actually looks like in mobile, and helped make better products across the portfolio, and taught me a lot about what it actually takes to run a crazy stressful live ops environment.
Awesome, thanks, Sean. Vincent, can you think, what comes to mind?
Well, there's a few things. As a developer who's still in a startup mode, basically everything I do could be taken as a mistake, but also can be taken as an experience, and then you learn from it, and then it doesn't become. It becomes, like the
stepping stone.
The stepping
right?
stone, yeah. And so you were mentioning bad co-founders. On my side, I was the only founder, so that might have been considered a mistake as well, because when the going gets tough, having a good co-founder or having someone else that you can talk to, or you can spread the stress. Can help a lot. I have a team right now, but it's super hard finding like a co-founder, somebody who's as crazy as I am, where I want to go, and but like I'm still looking, and it helps to be able to to share.
I love that. And yeah, I think that's you're touching on something really important, which is what can feel like a huge mistake or a huge trial that you're going through at one point with time actually turns out to be exactly what you needed at that point to take you where you were going to go. So it's cool that you experienced it that way. Lee, you were mentioning, talking about VC, and I think we can just talk about funding in general and maybe some pitfalls to avoid here in terms of what you should be expecting from VC,
Well, I don't know about VC. Like I think in the chat before, we've avoided VC for the game. It just was never necessary for the type of games that we were making. I think you have a lot more experience with VC.
We have not avoided VCs.
Okay, but yeah, we've had. I think what we were talking about is just all the different ways that you can fund a game, and then sort of the things to avoid. VCs can be the type of thing where they're looking for giant multiples compared to a publisher that might just have a little bit of skin in the game of that game, and there's just a ton of other options. So I guess what's the question really?
Yeah, definitely. So those are alternatives to VC, and I think Sean, you had a.
Yeah, I think with anytime you're taking money from an external party, you have to make sure that your incentives are aligned and your objectives are the same. And venture capital is something that people talk about. It's the ultimate thing. It's sort of like a celebrity kind of status, but it's really about having the highest of expectations for yourself and the company that you want to build, which implies also turning down smaller opportunities, right? So you cannot be satisfied with small success. You're only satisfied with large success, and that is a very different kind of company than a lifestyle business, which can be very viable. Lots of indies can make that work. And there's crowdsourcing, and you had a number of things that you rhymed off there, Lee. But before you take someone else's money, or before you try to get somebody else's money, really make sure that you understand what they expect and think deeply about what you actually want and what kind of company you want to build.
Yeah. So the importance of alignment. Vincent, do you want to add to that?
Well, I'm not really into VC right now, but I mean, I've been discussing with a lot of publishers, and I think it's still. I would agree with what's been said, because I think it's basically the same thing. Make sure you align. What you want to do. Don't just say yes because you want the money.
Yeah, so I think that's a really valid point. And if you take that into just thinking more now about the team and how important alignment is and how important the culture that you set is. And so are there experiences that you guys have had or challenges that you've encountered in creating an environment for high-performing teams, things that have happened and things that you are now doing differently?
When I've met a lot of other studios, one common thing I find is they're like, well, we're best friends, we should start a studio together, and it's not really a good idea. Like there's a great phrase, if I can remember it. It's a friendship based on business is stronger than a business based on friendship. And what that means is that if you have a partner that you really work well together, it's about mutual respect, and you become friends over time. It's a lot better, and you both have things to do. It's a lot stronger than a bunch of guys coming together, a bunch of friends, and being like, let's figure out a role for everyone and get through it, because then that ends up with disasters and bad co-founders and people that don't pull their weight and then bad feelings overall. So yeah, that's one of the biggest horror stories I've seen. And it becomes much worse also with family. It's another thing that I've seen. But yeah.
Yeah, Sean, I think you were saying something about also being overt in your culture.
Yeah, I think like culture in particular, just like raising money, like all these sort of topics, it's very important to be explicit and remove assumptions as much as possible. So like, do you want a command and control structure where like you're the boss and you tell people what to do, or do you want more of a producer model where there's trusted people who are going to be creative directors that are going to lead a team? Or are you going to have a more flat organization where everybody contributes and tries to figure it out together? Like, those are very different things, and they cannot coexist. And if you don't define what it is ahead of time, and you bring someone in that wants to be part of a flat org, but you want to tell them what to do, it's not going to work, right? And that's not any one person's fault. Well, ultimately, it's the CEO's fault. Everything's the CEO's fault. I think that's the most advice I can give you. But if you aren't aligned on why you're there and who you're trying to find, then it's going to be really hard to build any sort of high functioning company.
Definitely. So, talking about that, building up a game and thinking about the audience, which is something we talked about quite a bit. Are you building a game around an audience? Are you finding like the game that you love and then like trying to figure out if there's an audience for it? Which way does it go? Do you stick with an audience over the different kinds of games that you go over? What have you found has been the most challenging when thinking about the audience of the games that you're coming up with?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately with our company, where we're very dumb in that the products that we create are just so different each time that we're not keeping the audience like we should. Like that's my advice to a lot of young studios is to like not do what we did, where each game, you spend 4 years on a game, you want to make something completely different. So we spent 4 years on Apotheon, which is a Greek mythology game. It's like, okay, now let's make this weird roguelike that doesn't appeal to any of those fans. And then we do the same thing, and then we just finished a game called Witchwood last year, which is a narrative crafting adventure. The most commonly, it's great on the Switch with casual gamers. And our next game called Gunhead is an FPS that no Witchwood players would like. And then so I'm realizing that is a very dumb thing to do. We're catering more to our own development sensibilities, where we're just sick of one genre and move to the next, rather than actually keeping an audience. So it really is, it's terrible to sort of start from blank each time with a game, when it should be building off the success each time. The great thing to have with the studio is if you have these people that like follow you to the next game, that go on your Discord, you have a newsletter, you're not starting from scratch each time hoping to have to hit an audience. So yeah, I think I don't even know if we're changing. It feels like the next game we're planning is actually going to be completely different again. But that's the main advice I would give. Like, find genres to stick to, find niches, find an audience, and then cater to that audience. I think it's a great thing to do.
Vincent, how do you think about the audience for your games?
I'd have to agree, because we're doing basically the same. We're doing the same mistake, whereas like we're working on one type of game for one type of audience, and so we have like a side project that's working, and instead of going into the same direction, we try to go with something completely different, because we wanted to try to maybe poke like another market instead of maybe cannibalizing. But it has its problems with that, because as Lee said, you start from scratch every time, so you got to be prepared for that. So I would probably say the same thing. If you're gonna be doing something, you like concentrate on that thing first, and then build upon it.
Yeah, audience is super important, and you have to focus on it, but you'll never know if it's right, and it'll drive you crazy because it's impossible to be certain, right? Like there's no audience book that you can read that's going to give you any answers, and it's this crazy tension of belief and research and faith, right? Like there's a triangle, and you can pick some sides and do some things like that, but it's definitely true that you cannot build a game without an audience in mind. You have to have like a purpose and something that you're trying to achieve and people that you want to appeal to. But whether or not something's going to work is something that you can waste a lot of time on, in my opinion. And it's more important to try to find the no's, right? Find the things that you don't think are going to work, that don't resonate with the team, that have examples that have failed that you can't improve, that just are too small for the revenue or download size that you want to try to go after, and try to think about it that way. But it's a really hard topic.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about the team and having a game that is really in line with the motivations of the team and the expertise of the team, and how you guys found any challenges in balancing that out. So the team's expertise, what the team actually wants to be doing, and then their motivation over the course of the lifespan of the dev cycle, which is launch and obviously beyond in a lot of the games. So have you found any trials and tribulations in that?
Well, nothing makes people happy to work on a game like success. That's cold hard truth. So The Simpsons was amazing to work on because it was The Simpsons and there's this great nostalgia thing, and people didn't really like farm simulation games who were working on it, but it was The Simpsons and it was making a ton of money and it was really cool to work on. And in our current company, we don't have a Simpsons that we're working on, and it's sometimes challenging to align, really passionate gamers with the casual audience who sometimes feel like they're at odds. So, it's situational. I think some people have the ability to really care about the craft and sort of what you're making and understand the purpose and the direction and the vision. And some people have to work on something that they themselves personally are passionate about, and it's just different.
On our side, since we're a smaller smaller team, I think it's super important that the team believes believes into the project and in the market, or because it's sometimes since we don't have all the money and all the so the incentive is to believe into what you're working on, because that's what you're holding on to, so there's no not yet like the incentive of success and making printing money and stuff. So you just gotta believe into what you're doing, and making sure that the team is super cohesive. Like you were talking about, like, culture. You gotta make sure that everybody's on board, like in the same direction, and that they believe not only in the project but in the team itself, and that sometimes when we were looking to hire people, like one thing I kept saying was that like I prefer having somebody that's a team member and with less knowledge, because like being competent, that's something you can learn, but being an a-hole, that's something like that's super hard to change.
Yeah, 100%. So recruitment's important. And Lee, I guess you have something to say on that, since you guys, how do you manage that? Do you have any friction when you're going? You explained that you were changing genres with each game and
Right.
like direction. How does that?
Yeah, there's a motivation-wise. There's a graph of like that's common in game dev Twitter and such, of like enjoyment over time with the game dev cycle, where the prototype is really fun and you're really happy and excited and think about all the possibilities. And then you expand that to a game concept, and then now you have to actually make content and like fill the thing and make it an actual game, and it just like dies down into like. And then, then the game you start to question yourself. You're like, what is this even a game? Do people care? Do people want guns on their heads? And then you get near the end of development, and then there's a little bit of excitement that happens again because you're close to release, but you're like, okay, this is finally working. Pieces come together. So it really is just managing that, just knowing that that's going to happen every time. There's rarely a game dev experience where you're like Minecraft and you release an alpha of it and everyone loves you. It's more like you get a concept, it kind of works, you spend a lot of time on content, you question yourself, some things don't work, you take all these different paths that have to go back, and sometimes you make terrible mistakes that adds months to development time. So it really is, the way that we kind of manage that is knowing that, expressing that to the team, that like, yes, we're good, this thing we spent 2 months on sucks, but we can, it's part of the graph is figuring that out. And navigating all that stuff. And then we also try to have, that's a reason to have multiple projects, because it's like developing a game is really an emotional roller coaster of like some days things work out and it feels awesome, but it's the same sort of thing when something doesn't work, it feels terrible. So when you do have multiple projects, when there's a lot of other things going on, when not everything is dependent on one thing, then it just makes that emotional roller coaster a little bit easier to bear. And especially when you have a team like that with people working on different things, and it's rather than a single person having all that emotional weight. We also try to just keep things interesting on the team. So like one guy is not doing UI programming for the entire time because UI programming is notoriously terrible. And then I think that we just try to keep all those things in mind to keep team motivated and just you kind of having been through game dev cycles, it's all kind of the same in that way.
Yeah, it's really true. The cycle of the start of the projects is so much fun. It's everything's possible and everything's new and it's like super exciting, and it definitely can get tedious and can start to drag, and shipping things quickly really helps. Even if it seems half-baked, you learn a lot from just getting it out there, seeing whether people will play it. It could be internal play tests, like Discord private releases or whatever, but just forcing yourself to be done with it at a certain point really helps, and because it's really important to move on as well, because you can get really stuck. I don't think this is the section where we're really talking about this sort of thing, but we've done that a little bit at my current studio, where we've worked on games for too long. Like it always seems like it's really close, and like, oh, just a little bit more, but in reality, it's just never going to get there, and it's not actually going to achieve the objective. But you form a real emotional attachment with it sometimes, and it can be hard to separate from that and move on to something else. But it's
Yeah, I think you touched on something that's really topical right now, and in today's like difficult market, it is quite common. Like, how far do you go? I have a game, I feel passionate about it. I have this idea, the KPIs aren't there yet. Are they going to be there one day, ever? And where do you draw the line? And that's a really, really tough decision to make. So actually, maybe one more question before we go to questions from the audience, and to segue into decision making in your different teams and stuff, and how has that been challenging? Like I know, Sean, you guys have a bossless culture, which is awesome. Have you like noticed any friction on being able to make those kinds of calls? Like, is there like an organization that still allows for for it to be bossless, but still for someone to be able to make the calls? Is that something that you've played around with? And I think same goes to you guys specifically around decision making.
Yeah, so a lot of us at the Extra Dimension Games have worked together before, so we have a shorthand, and there was a lot of sort of just working history, right? Like we knew each other. It wasn't quite friends from before, but we had worked together closely on The Simpsons, and we sort of knew each other, and we were all fairly experienced, and so we actually didn't talk about decision making or really overt culture. And it was really problematic. So then we brought new people in, they didn't know what was going on. So like, who is making decisions here, and how is this actually decided? Like, what's happening? And trying to be really flat, then you're deliberately not trying to apply pressure, but it doesn't work unless you actually talk about it. So definitely talk about it. Don't leave hard things unsaid. You should be having hard conversations basically every day, but it should be free of emotion, right? Like hard conversations are really, really important, whether they're like interpersonal or challenging ideas or whatever it happens to be. Those have to happen, because otherwise you won't make creative progress. But if you don't have a framework, if you don't talk about how those things are supposed to happen, then it just withers. People just don't engage. So basically we didn't do it, but now we do it. So now we have this like better bossless culture that's sort of a bit more established. We have a clear structure where we have in lots of discussion and advice gathering. Someone is set to their, like, you're going to make the decision on this topic, and you can get as much advice as you want, but you don't have to take the advice. It's not your obligation to necessarily be told what to do. If the decision is yours, you can take it and you can do it. But then you also are accountable for the result. Not in a way like you get fired if there's something doesn't go right, but if you ignore advice or don't follow procedure or whatever it happens to be, then there's just a conversation to be had there. But because everyone is invested in helping the company succeed, that public accountability and being able to talk about whether or not someone actually met expectations is really powerful. So that's worked really well for us. Also, the key point for decision making is, I think this is my pet peeve right now, is I refuse to make decisions in public. they should always be solitary. You should have as much conversation as you need, and there should be lots of disagreement and advice taking and all sorts of things. But trying to decide things in a meeting is, I think, really fruitless, and I hate it.
Yeah, decision making like that. I think it's kind of for us. It's that we each kind of know, like the decision makers at the company. We each kind of know the area that we have. But even that, we argue endlessly on some things. And when there's a little bit of overlap, say with I'm sort of the technical or business, and the other person might be creative. If there's an overlap, which is like the game mechanics that hits both, the arguments could last like months of like going over this and really figuring it out. But I think the important thing that I've realized with that, and really all like a lot of the decision-making process, is that it's really good. Like it's good that if everyone's really passionate about the like which way they want to go and the decisions being made, but as soon as data needs to contradict them, there needs to be no sort of ego behind it, and it's really important to get across. And it's something that I try to really get across to every hire that we make, is that you should defend like hard for your technical decisions that you make. And this is what I try to get across to programmers. But the instant that data comes in or something that you're proven wrong, you need to switch your ego off and then just go with it. Like that's it's hard to sort of passionately argue for something and then be able to let it go instantly when like weakly held, I guess. And I think that's one of the most important things that I've realized for good decisions.
Vincent, do you want to add anything?
Well, one thing I'd say you need to make sure, like within your team, is to have somebody, you know, like depending on like design, animation, modeling, whatever, like every field, you need to have somebody that, you know, is the one that makes the call. I don't know, like because you can argue about things like over and over and over and again, but in the end, you need to and you know, like it is, you got to make sure that, you know, like he or she or they are the one that makes the final call. And then, because at one point, because like as an artist, you know, like in my company, I mean, there's always stuff that you can add and you can tweak, and as you were saying, and like I remember during my time at Ubisoft, there was like towards the end of a production, there's this person that comes that's a closer, and that person is just there to say, you know, it's good enough. We're not gonna fix that. This is, you know, they're closing the project, so you've got this whole list of stuff, and like this gets an extra hours to finish. This doesn't, you know, like it doesn't matter, and you need to have that. You need to think about that. You know, sometimes. And most of the time, you know, good enough is good enough. I mean, you can always tweak, but at one point, you need to ship the project. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think those are really good points. And maybe I'll plug in the 5 dysfunctions of a team for anybody who's working on a team. I think that is a really valuable read if you haven't read it. And it mentions one of the things, in order to have any of those like discussions, disagreements on months, like you were saying, Lee, in order to get to a decision that people are, you know, are feel accountable for, like you were saying, Sean, and the base is really trust. And I think like having that base trust on a team, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to have all the, you know, the disagreements that you need to have, the conversations, the accountability that you need from everyone on your team. So I think those are really valuable points that you mentioned, and I really recommend the book. I think we can take it to Q&A and open up the floor to anybody who has questions for people on the panel. This has been a wide topic, so you can feel free to.
Don't be shy. Last panel of Game Dev Stories.
And we can also take somebody who wants to share their own experience, maybe a failure that you've had that maybe over time you've also come to realize, well, that was a failure, but that's actually taught me so much. That's helped me got to a certain point. So also interested in hearing some of those stories.
Any failures? Oh, there's a man here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for volunteering failure. That's what we want to see. That's good.
Hello. So, yes, I am a failure.
Yes.
Woohoo!
First step.
One of my most favorite things to do as a developer is I like to experiment with stuff, experiment with ideas, new technology. Everything's popping up new, and I just kind of want to explore it. And you guys touched on the idea of focus on just having that one audience and try and focus on that section, but you still end up swapping to different ideas. So you go from first-person shooter to roguelike to RPGs to puzzles. So what if that's something you want to do? You want to explore more of different ideas. You want to learn more about different genres as well as your primary audience or your primary genre.
That's you, Lee. That sounds like your entire business model.
No, one company that I really admire is Supergiant, the guys that made Bastion and Hades. They had this ability to sort of make a very similar game in a completely different genre each time, using the same technology, and then each time they get better and better and they learn from it. And that's the sort of thing, like, I don't think anyone would think that Supergiant games are, like, they really are different genres, but each time it's a top-down game, same engine, and has a lot of the same great art sort of, not even different directions, but kind of they're learning each time. And that, I think, and also they get the same audience. So like someone who's interested in a Supergiant game usually is interested in the next one because they're people that like to try a lot of different genres. So I think there's still ways to do that. There's still ways to have like a core audience. There's still ways to use the same technology, and that's the way to do it. Not make a cozy crafting game and then an action FPS like we are. That's not the way to do it.
Yes.
But yes.
Cool. Any other failure volunteers? I'll volunteer because I've failed as well. We've all failed. I'm interested because certainly with small studios, I've run several companies in the last few years, all relatively small compared to some of the big companies here, like 20 to 50 staff. I personally fail with delegation a lot of the time, and I fail to separate work from work. My wife would tell you this a lot. Work from sort of regular balance. And I sense in game development that's even more of a challenge because it's so intense. It's the hardest art form, right? You're trying to make something that looks beautiful but plays well. Things are falling apart all the time. Do you guys find that as well? That you struggle to kind of separate life, or just take too much on yourself?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that goes into the same thing I was talking about, the team motivation, where it's an emotional roller coaster. I can kind of embrace that now. And if something really goes wrong with the project, it's not like, well, this game is shitty, I'm shitty, and just give up on life. It's more like, well, this game didn't work out, so we're just going to move more to the next one. So I think it's kind of like, I just have that perspective a lot more now, where if something doesn't go right with the project, I can kind of keep living my life rather than that being the end of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of comes down to how much experience you have with stuff just being on fire, right?
That's the nature of most businesses, isn't it? It's constant.
So like when you first,
this is fine.
When you first ship something that takes down a hugely successful product and nobody can play it, you panic. But the third time you do it, you kind of know what to do. And then the 10th time, hopefully, I don't know why you're shipping so many broken builds, but you
should do something else.
There's some sort of run book and there's procedures and stuff like that. But so it's like you get used to living in that stress almost. And so, we
embrace the stress.
We try to have a fairly healthy work setup. We've got like unlimited vacation and encourage people, to take as much time as they need.
Do people take it though?
Yeah, they do. We average like 6 weeks a year.
That's great.
And,
that's great.
It's there for.
I was thinking unlimited vacation is a thing. People go, take as much time as you leave. Not this week though, because there's quite a lot on. So
well, you've got to model the behavior, and it has to actually be important, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
If it's actually part of the principles,
I wasn't picking apart your policy. I just know it's a thing that people make.
It's definitely a thing. A lot of times that's just fake. Yeah. But my point was more that I've gotten to a point where I know there's always crazy stress going on, and there's 10,000 things that need attention. But I am now able to compartmentalize it and like have dinner with the kids because that's important, and like make that time and have stress and life coexist, and it's important to be able to understand that balance and understand what's important to yourself and be able to get it. And if you don't get it from your current job, you should leave.
It's hard if you're in charge, but maybe it's not. I don't know.
I'd like to say, I'm still learning on this because, the sooner you take this, the better. And I'm still not doing it, So, like I do have a big family. My family doesn't see me. I'm working a lot. I'm pretty sure a lot of people, can relate to that. And everybody's going to tell you the same thing. It's like you need to take time for yourself, and you need to separate, and you need to listen to these people.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Even though, and it's one of those cases of, you know, like, do what I say, not what I do.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm getting there slowly. You know, like I'm starting to, you know, make some time.
Yeah.
But when you're knee deep into your like your first projects, I mean, you're in the learning phase,
Yeah.
and I guess you need to go through it at first to understand why it's so important not to do it.
Cool.
It's super dangerous. That's how like kids end up in QA doing 36-hour days. It's like, it's what you're supposed
got
to
to learn
do.
that
Go in the coal mines and find the bugs.
Well,
But
misery loves company, right? I feel better, actually. I feel better sharing. Can we cut that from the video? If my wife ever sees this, she'll go, like I said all those times. Cool. Do you have any final questions? They're all, no one, oh, there is one more failure at the front. I'm not sorry you're not a failure, sir. It might be something completely different.
None taken.
None. And then we'll move on after that.
Should have thought this through. What are some of the telltale signs that you should let go of a project? Or what I'm basically asking is, when do you know that you need to let go of a project before you end up in an insane asylum?
I think it's when it's too late.
I think it's extremely hard. Like, is it still on?
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah. A lot of the people I know that succeeded based on just persistence. Like, that was the most common factor I've seen in people who have succeeded. Startup games-wise, it's always been persistence. But at the same time, I would never give someone the advice to not ever give up. Because there's certain times you got to give up. Maybe the advice is don't give up on everything, but just give up on that path of like that game dev path. Go down a different path, sort of thing. Don't give up, but don't go all the way back. Just go like, I think of like a tree branch. You just go back a few branches and you go up another thing.
Give up a little bit.
Yeah, don't
Just
fall
give
off
a
the
little
tree,
bit.
sort of thing. To keep that analogy going.
Cool.
But
Yeah,
I don't know when you like. It's so hard to understand. Like, it's completely up to you. Of like, does this work or does this not work? When you question that, how do you know how you can change your product? It seems impossible to answer that in a general way.
I think what can be challenging is like also try to get a bird's eye view. Like usually your head is in it. And so you don't have like a very subjective view about whatever fire is going on right now. If you kind of find a way, someone, and then for yourself to take yourself out of it for a little bit to try to have a more objective view on it, I think that can help a lot.
yeah, it's definitely the hardest decision that you'll ever make. And it's very subjective. So you have to have the tenacity to see things through, but you have to have the wisdom to know when to stop, and that's a really hard contradiction. But advice overall is like hearing that someone needs glasses and offering them your glasses. It's just, it's not the same for everybody. Everything's different, and it's up to you to sort of think critically about it and understand it in your own context. So.
Excellent. And on that note, sorry.
No,
Sorry,
it's okay.
I thought we were going to...
It's probably bad advice anyway.
No, I feel bad now. Don't make me feel bad.
No. Well, what I was gonna say is like, if you're working with like a project or like something, it's like show it to people around. That's one thing, and build yourself a community, and you'll see if they like it. If you're having a hard time building a community, maybe that's a sign. Even though if you're and don't be too attached to your things. Kill your babies. Try taking stuff away as fast as possible to see if what you're doing is still works. If it does, probably you don't need that thing in the first place.
Cool. Hopefully that was useful advice. On that note, I am going to have to bring this to an end. I am going to have to end this particular project, which was brilliant. Thank you so much. A round of applause, please, to this panel. So good.